Hello, guys, and welcome to Bitcoin for Investors. With me, I have Cory Klippsten and Alyse, Killeen. Cory, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody in Boise and dialed in from around the world because Boise is the hotbed, a new place to be. This is Cory Klippsten, founder of swanbitcoin.com, also now swan.com, which is pretty awesome, and also managing partner of Bitcoiner Ventures, which in its early stages is just an AngelList syndicate. So we're like the junior varsity version of what Elise is up to. And this is Elise.
Cory, Clay, great to be with you today. So my name's Elise Killeen. I am the managing partner at StillMark, which is a fund focused fully on innovation in the Bitcoin space. And so we have the great fortune of working with some of the industry's most astute entrepreneurs at the pre-seed, seed, Series A stage. And so what that means is we're partnering with founders like Elizabeth Stark or Paul Itoy at Stackwork and Sphinx Chat. And the idea is to do well while doing good work. And the good work that Bitcoin is doing is really exciting. And it's been a great pleasure. And I feel very lucky to have been in the space since about 2013. And StillMark has been operating in this capacity since 2019. So we're all early, and it's good to be here together at this early and promising stage of Bitcoin.
I think probably the first place to start would be to talk a little bit about what are some of the companies that are coming up in the Bitcoin space, and from an investment perspective, like what makes these companies so interesting to invest in, especially when you compare them to, say, an asset like Bitcoin that goes up so quickly so often, that like what are the trade-offs there?
The time horizons for investing in startups can be very, very different from Bitcoin, and the path that Bitcoin would take on its, on the path to Bitcoinization. And, I'm fully in the camp that Bitcoin will be worth a lot more in the future. But it doesn't mean that over the same time horizon, you would necessarily have the same returns. And then you also have the benefit, if you're in at kind of the early stage, for most of my investments are in the seed stage. Elise is doing pre-seed, seed, and A. You're in at small numbers, and the law of small numbers versus large numbers says that there can be, great multiples there. And so you might end up with, a company that tops out and exits or goes public, let's say $1 billion or $3 billion or something like that. But that multiple from when you invested at, say, 10 million or 20 million or something like that can be dramatically higher than even the most bullish of Bitcoin bull runs over the next decade. So, if you're a good selector of deals and you have good deal flow and you add value to the degree that these companies actually want to take your money as opposed to filling up their cap table with somebody else, then you should be able to outpace Bitcoin if you're really good at it.
From my perspective, I would say venture capital and ownership of Bitcoin, participating in a venture fund versus owning Bitcoin, it presents two sorts of, fairly different risk reward balances. And I don't know that, at StillMark, the way that we think about what we do is that we want to be a top quartile or top decile venture fund, and we're a traditional venture fund. I don't know that I, expect or plan to outperform Bitcoin, but what I do expect and plan to do is to participate in Bitcoin becoming more valuable and more broadly distributed. And historically, we know that as adoption grows, the price of Bitcoin has risen. And I think that there's, I don't think that's accidental. I don't think that's, that those two things are independent of one another. And so part of StillMark's work is that if we're backing the best founders and we're selecting for business models that make sense against what the technology can do, then as a result, Bitcoin will achieve wider distribution, greater adoption quicker. And that will result in Bitcoin appreciating. And so, I hope that Bitcoin beats fund performance. I hope that that's true. But the way that I evaluate our performance is against venture capital standards, and if were also good for Bitcoin. And so, it's a complex balance, but I hope that the investors that we partner with, so the investors that are backing our fund, I think the way that we think about the best way to participate is to both hold Bitcoin and to back early stage startups in the ecosystem. So with that perspective, sort of doing both, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 dynamic, versus, something more straightforward than that.
Now, and when you guys are taking on LPs, I know there have been a few other venture firms in the space. They very specifically, like the capital they're looking for from these investors who are going to be investing in these companies, they're looking for people who understand Bitcoin and are aligned with kind of the Bitcoin ethos. Do you feel like that's also very important, that the capital that's going into these companies, that's investing in these companies, also believes in the value proposition of Bitcoin?
I'm also an advisor to the Bitcoin Venture Fund, which is what Chris Calicott is running out of Dustin Trammell's office down in Austin. And, it's kind of an OG. I think Dustin was like the third person running Bitcoin after Satoshi and Hal. And so they have a very, very strict rule on, full alignment, and they're vetting the heck out of these people before they let them in the fund. And, and that's all well and good. With the LP base that we have of, 400 people or something in that are subscribe to the Bitcoiner Ventures Syndicate, if they apply, I accept them. And I don't really care, because they're not going to, take a board seat, and they're just, a small check in an SPV that's a single line on a cap table. And if they're a blockchain lawyer or, an altcoin founder or whatever it is, like, I'm taking their fiat that they got from wherever they got it and converting it to good use with Bitcoin companies. So I don't have any sort of governance concerns about that. And then I guess the third version is kind of when I think about my own cap table at Swan, all of the people that I talk to and that I listen to and that have any influence are Bitcoiners. And then if they're just an angel and aren't really spending other people's money, and therefore kind of have like a duty to, let's say, LPs, and also deep pockets for lawyers to try to get you to do something altcoin related, or, just do something that we don't think is good for Bitcoin, then we wouldn't let them on the cap table. So I don't mind taking, a check from like Dan Matuszewski, who's, a crypto trading fund manager, but also loves Bitcoin. That's totally fine with me, because he's not taking a board seat and it's just an angel check from him personally. But if I was going to take money from a fund at some point, then I would want it to be, somebody like an Elise, or, somebody like a Chris Calicott or something like that.
Frankly, people that are interested and that grok the opportunity in Bitcoin just tend to be people that, we feel lucky to partner with, right? So there's not sort of been this dynamic where someone is keen to back the fund that we think is, someone that a founder wouldn't be proud to partner with directly. And so I don't really feel any tension here. But Bitcoin is advantaged by having more resources. And so while there are, multi-billion-dollar funds that are going into the altcoin space and token spaces, Bitcoin founders, in my opinion, have been undercapitalized against sort of the opportunity that exists in the startup landscape. And so it's my hope that more resources will be dedicated to Bitcoin. And in that aim, we're making sure to be broad in the kind of investors that we can work with, same as what Cory is suggesting.
When we're talking about investing in these companies, which industries, obviously the financial system is an industry that we are seeing right now getting disrupted by Bitcoin. Are there other industries that Bitcoin is disrupting outside of finance?
So I think there will be. So the way that StillMark is a thesis-driven fund. And so what that means is that while we enjoy founders reaching out to us and certainly do invest in founders that we meet through inbound channels, we also generate our own investment hypotheses and then go to search for the founders that are best positioned to take advantage of those. And the way that we do that is that we're paying close attention to what's happening at the protocol level, both Bitcoin Core, Lightning Network, sidechain technologies, And we're anticipating what that means in terms of sectors that are empowered. So here's an example. We know that Lightning Network has matured significantly over the past several quarters. And as a result of that, payments opportunities are much more promising. And bringing that a step further, what payments sort of means and what types of companies we can back as a result of payments being at this place where it can scale. It will define what sectors we can target. So for instance, today, a gaming play, a company that introduces Bitcoin rewards via gaming or peer-to-peer payments in gaming or gaming rewards makes more sense than it might have made 2 years ago prior to the Lightning Network being at this more advanced and mature stage. We're also, I've spoken a lot about looking at opportunities in the earning space. So what I mean by that is, for example, we've backed a company called Stackwork. And what Stackwork is a mechanical Turk sort of competitor where they're building a distributed workforce that's paid in real time via Bitcoin using the Lightning Network. And we expect that as emerging markets come online to Bitcoin via Lightning Network, that Stackwork or other sorts of earning opportunities will face greater opportunities on the supply side, on the talent side. And we want to make sure to take advantage of that. Of course, gaming is an example also of earning opportunities in Bitcoin. And so really for StillMark, it's about matching where the tech is, where the underlying protocols are, to the opportunities that we seek out for investment.
And this might be a good point for me to point out too. I think probably a lot of our audience may not know what Lightning Network is. So it may be good to go into a little bit like what Lightning Network is and how this layer 2 solution is maybe impacting our ability to build new businesses on the Bitcoin ecosystem.
So Lightning Network is Bitcoin's payments network. And what it means for users is that you can transact instantly, globally, and virtually for free. And that unlocks a whole new economy, really. It means that, just simply that if you want to send, if you have a daughter or son studying abroad and you need to send them, food money for the week, and it's a Sunday night, you can do that. You don't need your bank to be able to wire your son studying in Berlin his food money for the week. But it also means that you can transact with folks that have been deemed to be high risk because maybe they live somewhere where, GDP is lower or the common, household savings is lower. You can transact there. And finally, it means that remittances, the concept of remittances is just flipped on its head. So this is relevant to El Salvador again. So El Salvador introduced Bitcoin as legal tender in September, and a large part of that economy is driven by remittances, people working abroad and sending money back home. And you can do that on Bitcoin without relying on an intermediary that's imposing fees on you. And so to be able to transact peer-to-peer instantly across the globe, almost for free, this is why I think of Bitcoin as fintech for poor people. And frankly, the TAM on a market where you can serve everyone from, folks with the most meager means all the way up to folks with the greatest means, I hope that it unlocks for the audience an understanding of the potential opportunity to do well while doing good in Bitcoin.
So for some people, probably when they think of investing in Bitcoin, they're probably not even to the point where they're thinking about investing in companies. They're still looking at investing in Bitcoin, the asset. And what I've found is kind of even just trying to get somebody to that first step where they're investing in Bitcoin, one of those hurdles is talking about what a store of value is and why it's so important in today's environment. So I was wondering if we could kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen the market decide the best way to get into that, because it's the beginning of every book and every article at this point is kind of get somebody to question what is money in the first place, and why does it fluctuate, and why is it just this paper, and what did it used to be, and what's the history of money. And once you get them to kind of think about something that almost none of us had sort of explained to us in school, and we didn't have to write papers about that, at least until maybe grad school when you took money and banking class or something like that. It's just not part of our primary education or secondary education in the US, at least. And we don't have the frame of reference that some other countries may have, where they've gone through currency changes or devaluations or whatever. And we know it's a lot easier to understand Bitcoin if you're in Turkey or Argentina or something like that than it is, in Mississippi or New York. So I think that's probably the first part, is just kind of start with history and an understanding of money. And I think little by little you're starting to sprinkle in some Austrian truth, the sort of undisputed aspects of Austrian economic thought. And I think that generally helps people kind of build a little bit of a mental framework that will allow them to understand the money side of Bitcoin. And, I always kind of lean on, two things, which is kind of just describing that chart of the monetization of an asset, where you go from like collectible to store of value to medium of exchange, and then find the unit of account. That's kind of the progression broadly. Obviously, it's fuzzy at the borders, but it's broadly the progression that we're following and that previous monies have followed historically. And then, the other one that I think is just super helpful, if you only have 60 seconds or something like that, is just to explain, gold is really good at storing value across time. It's really terrible at transporting value across space. Fiat, digital money, paper money is really good at transporting value across space and terrible at transporting across time. And Bitcoin is better than both of them at transporting value across time and space. And that just gets them thinking about, like a 2x2 matrix or however they think, and at least kind of opens up the aperture through which you can have more conversation, or point them to some resources.
And younger generations, so thinking about Gen Z and how they'll understand store value, it will likely be via seeing Bitcoin's hard money policy against more dynamic monetary policies of other protocols. And so it's interesting. Cory gave a great example, which is that if you live in a country where you have seen monetary policies and the value of your currency swing wildly, it's easier to grok the value proposition of software enforced rules around Bitcoin's monetary policy. But for folks in developed markets, and I suspect for a generation of young Americans, for example, the way they will discover that is by understanding, over the course of a couple years or of a full market cycle, what it means for Bitcoin to have hard rules that it promises and, lets rest, versus protocols that are kind of, trying to be smart with those rules in order to, in the short term, appreciate the value of the associated token. And so, it's interesting to me as a non-Gen Z person to sort of learn from that group about how they come to those understandings and recognizing from their perspective what Bitcoin is. And I think a lot of what that will be is a consistency around its hard promises.
And this is probably a great segue into the design of Bitcoin itself. Because Elise, I know you've talked quite a bit about this in other podcasts, just the design of Bitcoin. And what was it about Bitcoin's design that drew you to Bitcoin?
Right. So I came into Bitcoin at a time when I was in VC already. I was largely at that point, 2013, focused on investments in the cloud networking space. And it was kind of the perfect way to find Bitcoin because what hooked me was not Bitcoin as a store of value or appreciating asset, but it was really Bitcoin, the protocol, and what that meant for applications or infrastructure that could be built on top of it. And so the reason why it made sense to sort of bet my career at that point on a fledgling technology was because of what I said earlier, which was that if you have a decentralized network where you can align the incentives of stakeholders that would otherwise perhaps be adversaries, but through Bitcoin, you can align these incentives. If you have that, that means that people of lesser means or of who are not in the inner circle can access the same sort of financial tools as the privileged, then that is very compelling. And it's not just compelling for folks that are interested in social issues or who think that, that folks should have access to banking resources, but it's interesting just for folks that are thinking about how to back, private market companies that are pursuing the largest TAM, right? Because if you can address a broader user group, then you have, a larger market. And that's what Bitcoin can do through decentralization. And so, that's sort of what hooked me on the tech. And then also the fact that this was going to be led by a group of people that, wanted to make money, yes, but also wanted to positively progress culture and not for sake of fulfilling some sort of ego-driven agenda, but because they wanted to put their talents towards it, to dedicate their lives to this. Who could turn down an opportunity to work with developers like that? I just found it so compelling that there was no way to kind of pull my thoughts from it. And, that hasn't changed. I think that, we're very lucky to be working at a time when minds like Andrew Palestra and, Songkit, younger folks at Blockstream, or Peter Wolle, these types of folks are all here at the same time working on the same problems. And they're sort of like once in a lifetime type of talent. And so, I think that spending time where the smartest people in the world have dedicated their lives, that's always going to make sense. And it's one of the reasons why, I remain quite grateful to be a part of this ecosystem.
My dad and I are working on a project right now. And one of the things he just always is telling me, he's like, everyone we're talking to is so young. And that seems like that's very unique to the Bitcoin space. Do we see that in other industries and other investment opportunities? Are there people as young as, kind of the Bitcoin ecosystem?
I actually haven't noticed that really at all. I think it's pretty normal distribution of age versus what I see in tech. If anything, maybe skewed a little bit older, precisely because there are a lot of people that don't have to work for money because they already have it and wouldn't be working unless it were for this cause of Bitcoin. So I think we have 4 previously fully retired people working at Swan who are already, had big exits in tech or, or OG Bitcoiners or whatever, and they wouldn't get out of bed to do any work whatsoever unless it were working for the Bitcoin cause. And so we benefit from that, right? So yeah, I think there's tons of really experienced coders in their 30s and 40s cranking away on this stuff. If anything, you have to have taken some lumps and to really understand and have good mental frameworks to be able to contribute, to be able to hang with these people. In general, I think that, Bitcoin coders skew significantly more experience than CryptoKitty coders or, your typical Silicon Valley engineer.
Yes. So I think that's right. So we, so one of the things that I do in addition to, the work that we do at StillMark, but it's related, is that I'm on the board of directors at Blockstream. And of course, this is a group of folks that are, very much adults, largely. But at the same time as I say that, I think that it's interesting to me that this group of, folks can continue to get the best young talent coming out of University of Chicago, for instance, that's Songkit. And there's other examples. It's not just him. So I sort of see both. And one of the things I'm excited about in Bitcoin right now is the advancement of dev tools that make it easier, that sort of lower the bar for what you need to do to build apps on top of Bitcoin technologies. And with that, I suspect, or not suspect, I mean, I'm already hearing this. With that, I think that young developers that have been building in other environments will begin to migrate to Bitcoin technologies. And so the ages, you know, and experience levels might sort to balance out. And then what makes up for the age and experience, I think, are folks that seem to have some sort of innate understanding of how to build businesses in this new paradigm of decentralized tech. And that is kind of all across the board in terms of ages. So, you know, and I'm not going to call anyone out as being, you know, the gray hair guy that has an innate understanding of the tech, but we have those in our portfolio. And we also see, you know, young guys and women that just understand what it is to create value and capture some of that value in a way that is consistent with Bitcoin's value proposition. And so, you know, Cory's like right on that it's, you know, folks that are quite experienced building. And I think the trend is starting to expand so that the younger folks and also folks that have, you know, maybe a slightly different skill set are starting to flood in as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll talk soon.